Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for being with us tonight. It's good to be back with you. We are less than 90 days from the primary elections in Tennessee, and while there are many important races to watch, the office of governor is certainly the most important single race. The three main GOP candidates are Monty Fritts, John Rose, and Marsha Blackburn. Who will be nominated by the GOP? Will they continue to support failed D.C. politicians who have spent our country into oblivion funding an overreaching, unconstitutional federal government like Marsha Blackburn and John Rose have? Or will they finally support someone with integrity who actually understands the constitutions, both the state and federal, that he will pledge to uphold, like Monty Fritts? Will they back a candidate with a plan for more of the same in Tennessee? Or vote for a candidate that plans to charge the gates of hell? Will they back a candidate that wants to spend more of their money while taking more power for government? Or will they back a candidate that wants to spend less, govern less, and allow our citizens to experience more of their God-given liberties? We'll soon find out. Nonetheless, our guest tonight is the Liberty and Less Government candidate, Monty Fritts. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch said the Supreme Court system is working. In a Sunday interview where he reflected on the country's founding principles, Gorsuch joined Fox News' Shannon Bream. This was a Sunday segment, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before last. He wanted to discuss his new book, Heroes of 1776, the story of the Declaration, the story of the Declaration of Independence, which is also co-authored by Janice Neitz. In the segment, Gorsuch argued that the U.S. court system is succeeding in mitigating complex issues. Americans file about 50 million lawsuits a year, and the court takes 70 of the hardest ones. The lower courts and judges have disagreed about what the law means about a statute or a provision of the Constitution, and it dictates in a certain particular case. And of course, the court has 9 justices, and he makes the comment, it's hard to get 9 people to agree on anything. And that's true. He said, we've been appointed by 5 different presidents over 30 years, and yet we're able to resolve those cases unanimously about 40% of the time. So when you bear that in mind, the system is working pretty much as it has for a very, very long time, he added. Now, Gorsuch considers himself to be an originalist, meaning he adheres to the original intent of the Constitution. Now, that's his opinion. So is the court working? Is the Supreme Court working? Now, I will say that this court is better than the recent courts we've had. It is an improvement. I don't think President Trump's appointees have been that consistent, that great. I still think the 2 best are Thomas and Alito. And then you got the 3 libs. The Trump appointees, it's, roll of the dice with those guys, including Gorsuch. Now, Gorsuch, like I said, considers himself an originalist. This is the same guy that found a right for transgenders to be protected from sex discrimination under existing civil rights protections that were passed decades ago to protect women from workplace discrimination. Now, whether or not the court should have been involved in that whole thing, it's a whole other discussion. But he found that, and he wrote the opinion on that. Yeah, that guy says he's an originalist, says the court is working. What a joke. And further proof that no, the Supreme Court is not working. Just the sheer number of cases and the many topics that are not legitimately under federal control undercuts that argument. And the continued fallacy of federalizing the Bill of Rights through the 14th Amendment, something the amendment did not do, something that the courts did not think it did for almost 60 years. The first time they applied anything was in 1925. And from there, they added over and over. As a matter of fact, they didn't finalize applying the Bill of Rights to the 14th Amendment until 2010 with the McDonald case. They finally incorporated the Second Amendment. So that's a problem, and I've talked about that before on this show, and we'll certainly talk about it again. The federalizing of the Bill of Rights turns the Bill of Rights on its head. We got to remember that. At the time the Bill of Rights was passed, every state had a Bill of Rights. They were not worried about their states violating the Bill of Rights. They were worried about the federal government violating their rights. That's the whole reason we have a Bill of Rights, is because the Anti-Federalists made it a point to say, hey, this document, the Constitution that they were debating, doesn't have a Bill of Rights, and we're very concerned about that. And they were right to be. And it turns out they've been right about it, even though we actually added a Bill of Rights. Over time, people, the government and the courts have had a huge hand in this, have perverted it. Also, they get to choose which cases they take. It's not as if every case is going to make it to them, even if it hasn't been agreed to at a lower court. They kind of pick and choose. In the old days, the court used to ride circuit. In addition to their Supreme Court duties, they rode a circuit. It wasn't until the late 1890s that changed. By the way, who changed that? Well, Congress changed that. Because Congress can actually control the courts, especially, remember, they're appellate jurisdiction, and I'll get to more of that in a minute. That can be adjusted by Congress. Can, and it has been. So the court was never intended to be the final arbiter of everything concerning the Constitution. If that's the case, they would have been given the power of the sword or the power of the purse. They were given neither. But we've allowed them to take power. And in fairness, yes, they started early on. There was concerns about the court early on, and people like Justice Marshall, certainly almost every opportunity they got, expanded federal power. Now, in fairness to Marshall, and to his credit, even though he was all about expanding federal power, even he understood that the Bill of Rights were a limit on the federal government, not the state government. We would be better off if Congress would use its authority under Article 3, Section 2 to limit the court's appellate jurisdiction. And speaking of the court, Chief Justice Roberts recently wrote an article warning the court about overturning long-held precedent. He didn't warn the court about blatantly violating the Constitution. He didn't warn the court about creating things out of thin air. He warned them about overturning long-held precedent. Now, this is something that the Democrats have complained about recently as well. But this whole thing of precedent. Precedent matters until it doesn't. Courts overturn precedent all the time. It's strange that the Dems had no problem, and apparently I think Roberts may have made some comment, but I think he could have done more if he was concerned about precedent on the whole marriage issue. Now remember, the Dems had no problem overturning the precedent of marriage, which was understood to be one thing for thousands of years. But that was overturned to allow sodomite marriage. Precedent alone is not legitimate. It is only legitimate if it happens to align with the Constitution. If it doesn't, it should be overturned. Speaking of that, the recent decisions on the redistricting, that's all that was overturning a precedent that was not legitimate. We should never have had race-based congressional districts. The intent of the civil rights laws were to make sure that you weren't discriminated against, prevented from voting because of the color of your skin. Not to create districts that were all black, or this idea that, we have to not only make sure they're not discriminated against, but we may have to make sure that they as a block have power. No, that's not the way districts are supposed to be set up. We've been practicing that form of discrimination for decades now. So overturning precedent, like I said, is nothing new. It's been done a lot over the years, and it's only a good thing or a bad thing based on its correlation to the Constitution. If you overturn a precedent that actually aligns with the Constitution, then that's a bad thing. If you overturn a precedent that doesn't align with the Constitution, then that's a good thing. So it all depends. The Constitution is what counts. You don't take an oath to precedent. You take an oath to the Constitution. You don't take an oath to judicial policy or judicial practice, you take an oath to the Constitution. We've allowed the court to cite precedent and create extra standards that are not based upon the language of the Constitution, but the opinion of the court. You ever hear things about strict scrutiny, regular scrutiny, different levels of scrutiny? Those are things created by the courts. You're not going to find that anywhere in the Constitution. Well, who gave the court the authority to create extra constitutional standards when deciding cases, or really rendering opinions? Because bottom line, they don't have the sword, they don't have the purse. If the executive branch or the legislative branch thinks that the court has given opinion that's not based on the Constitution and should not be, then they can take action, okay? Actually, they should have taken a lot more action over the years. We probably should have had a lot of justices impeached and removed. Now, so ultimately the problem with the court is the fault of Congress, because Congress ultimately has the authority to rein them in. They've just chosen not to most of the time. Now, there have been some cases throughout our history where they have limited the appellate jurisdiction of the court, to include, after 9/11, Patriot Act, good, bad, or ugly, they have that authority. They did it in the 90s, having to do with federal prison reform. So they can do it. You know, they can totally do away with a whole federal district. I'd love to see that. I would love to see the Supreme Court become a shell of what it is right now, because it has been one of the most damaging branches, allowed to be by the Congress, of course. But, you know, we have no recourse with the courts. We don't get to elect them. We get to elect presidents that appoint them and the senators that approve them, but we don't get to elect them. And, you know, really, a lot of these confirmation processes, besides being circuses and sideshows like the Kavanaugh one, there's a lot of people, especially the Republicans, they'll approve anybody. If a president, it doesn't matter how far left the president is, how far left the justice is. We have people, and I remember, I think it was Lamar Alexander made this remark or words to this effect that, well, you know, it's the president. If he chooses that guy, then, you know, that's who we should support. So much for advise and consent. Anyway, we long ago traded the rule of law for the rule of man. While the current court, as I said, is an improvement over past courts, it's still actively destroying our Constitution and empowering the other two branches as well. And that wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at tninformer.tv@gmail.com. Okay, it'll be a little while before Monty joins us, but hey, by the way, I want to welcome those of you on Facebook who are watching tonight. So we are live broadcasting this on Facebook tonight as well. Hey, make sure your friends, make sure to tell your friends about us. We're going to look at doing some things down the road. I will probably start taking a few more articles and reading them and, giving you my thoughts on them, good, bad, or ugly. Because I think I think way too often, we read things and we never get the counterpoint to it. We just get that side. And if it's somebody that we respect and that thinks like us generally, we just say, oh, okay. And we defer to people too much. I think we've done way too much deferring as conservatives, as people who say we care about the Constitution, we defer. I'll give you an example. Within our state of Tennessee, our AG, Skermetti, who, by all accounts, is an improvement over the last one, Herb Slattery. But that's an incredibly low bar. He gets all this praise, but let's not forget the Hughes versus Lee case. Well, who's fighting that? Who's doing all the legal work? Who is doing the legal wrangling? Who's making the legal cases for the governor to be used against the citizens where our Second Amendment rights are concerned? Well, Section 26 of our state constitution. That's Skermetti. So, we have to be careful to think that just because somebody has an R behind their name or because they're an improvement that, okay, we're just going to defer to them. We defer to experts way, way too often, and come to find out those experts have an agenda. I don't care if you're talking in the medical field. I don't care if you're talking about scientific research, military, you name it. We get a lot of that. We defer to experts, and then you come to find out, yeah, maybe there's another agenda, or hey, they're being paid to say X, Y, or Z. And oh, by the way, anything that's been institutionalized, but it's become part of what's accepted, it's hard to go against that because guess what? The money that comes, especially, for instance, if you look like during COVID, and the whole vaccine industry, for years, any funding, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Fauci was in charge of National Institutes of Health. And there was probably not going to be any research that didn't fit the agenda, that didn't fit the talking points. And so we really have to be, I just really question who we can trust on anything. I think we have to really start reconsidering who we trust and on what basis we're trusting them. I just think I'll give you another good example, history. And we'll talk about this more, but for instance, 250th anniversary, and people will say the birth of our country. I'll say 250th anniversary, more of like a anniversary of our divorce from Britain. Much more a divorce decree than a birth certificate. Because remember, at the end, the whole focus of the Declaration of Independence was separation from Britain. They felt compelled to lay out why they were separating, why these 13 independent colonies wanted to become 13 independent states, state meaning, having the same meaning as Britain, France, Germany, whatever. They stated their reasons. And they signed, there was 13 people that signed for 13 different states. And if you look at the end of the war, the Treaty of Paris, it did not say, hey, we now recognize the United States as a separate nation. No, 13 independent states. And that's what we need to remember. We have lost, I think we've been told, we've been fed a lie about the origin of our country for a long time in terms of what the nature of it was. Federal government was never supposed to be a top-down government. 13 independent states, even under the Constitution, the states retained any sovereignty that they did not delegate to the federal government. Federal government's only supposed to do certain things. And if it's doing beyond that, then it's violating the Constitution. Well, who's supposed to hold it accountable? Well, the states, of course. This idea that the Supreme Court gets to decide whether or not it as a branch of the federal government gets to decide whether or not the federal government is violating the Constitution, that's insane on the face of it. The federal government was created by the states and for the states to do certain things that it was better for a federal government to do. States were still supposed to do everything else, and the states were always expected. If you go back and you read the Federalist Papers, and I know a lot of people say, well, the Federalist Papers are not the overall authority, but you know what? They're the different groups that want to talk about the Constitution and the Convention. They refer to the Federalists, and I think the reason it's important to refer to them, not that they're necessarily the best explanation, because there were other explanations given at the time that explained the nature of the Constitution, but the Federalist Papers were created specifically to counter the arguments made by the Anti-Federalists on why the Constitution should not be ratified, why they were afraid at the time that creating the federal Constitution, passing it as proposed, would lead to abuses. And oh wow, were they right on target. And they hit all the clauses. They talked about the Supremacy Clause, how it would be abused. They talked about the judiciary, how it would be abused. The Necessary and Proper Clause, the Commerce Clause, the General Welfare. They named them. They named them all. And the Federalist Papers were created specifically to refute their arguments. So that's why I like to refer to them, not because they're the end-all, be-all in explaining the nature of the Constitution, but because they were created specifically to refute the arguments by the Anti-Federalists. Now, there are some people that will twist that and say, well, hey, look, we knew what we were getting because the Anti-Federalists told us what would happen, and we approved it anyway, so we deserve it. No, that's crazy. The Federalist Papers were a defense of the Constitution. Oh, and by the way, to remove all doubt, in 1791, we passed the Bill of Rights, a restriction on the federal government. You know, there is, and I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not sure if it's in this version or not, or this publication, of all of the different, the preamble of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights. And I don't know that this one has it. I don't think it does. Okay. Oh, here it is. Yes. The conventions, and this is the preamble to the Bill of Rights, not to the Constitution, but to the preamble of the Bill of Rights passed in 1791. The conventions of a number of states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuses of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. And resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives, the United States and Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring, that the following articles be proposed. And then they list the Bill of Rights. Now, first Bill of Rights, of course, are the first 10 amendments. Now, the 9th and 10th apply to the states primarily. The states are the people. The first 8 amendments are what they have federalized generally and used against us. First Amendment, second, more the 4th and the 5th. And that's the ones that they have really turned on their head, but primarily the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, and I think those are probably the ones that get abused the most. But anytime you're allowing the federal government to do that, it turns it on its head. And no, the 14th Amendment did not address the Bill of Rights. It did not address the Bill of Rights. There were some people that wanted it to do that, but that's not the language that was passed. That was not what any of the states that ratified it understood. That was a creation of the court starting about 1925. From 1925 to 2010, the court incorporated most of the first 8 of the Bill of Rights against the states. All court creations, not the Constitution, not the 14th Amendment, a perversion of it. But hey, every lawyer will tell you, oh yes, that's the way it is. Almost every judge will tell you that. We have a few good ones that will tell you the truth. I've had them on this show. People like Jeff Cobble, Joe Wolverton. There's others. John Harris. He knows the truth. But most of these people, not only do they not know, they don't care. They don't care to know. They use case law. They don't use Constitution. Case law is not the Constitution. Now, in a situation where the case law involving precedent just happens to be constitutional, okay. But as a rule, they don't use the Constitution. But then when it's all said and done, they call it constitutional. You know, if we're going to claim something as constitutional, and if we say that we're going to take an oath to the Constitution, and we as citizens are going to defer to the Constitution, we should know what's in it, and we should know what was meant by it. You don't have to be a history professor. You can do just a little bit of reading and figure it out. It's pretty easy to figure out. It's not all the garbage that the courts have created over the years. And that's certainly one group that we've put on too much of a pedestal. That is the Supreme Court, federal courts in general. So our guest, Monty Fritts, should be here with us in just a few minutes. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, LifeWave. It supports healing, improves performance, and combats aging, all without the use of drugs or stimulants. Check it out, and we'll be right back with our guest.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back. Thank you for being with us again tonight. We're still waiting on Monty. He's on the road. He's at an event, so it might take a few minutes to get him up, but he will join us eventually. While we're waiting, we can talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the whole redistricting thing. Now, apparently there was a case in Louisiana. Some of you may know the name of it. I don't recall it, but I know that it basically did away with the idea of racial districts, and it said you can no longer that was discrimination, that you can't make a district based on race. And of course, the Democrats have tried to do that for years. Rather than just saying, okay, you can't discriminate, that's not good enough. Oh, you have to have a race-based district. Well, that was shut down by the Supreme Court in a case out of Louisiana. Well, right after that, and actually some of this started before. I know that Texas did some redistricting, and in California, I think Illinois is talking about doing some. But Virginia, they passed a redistricting bill which took them from, I think, a 6-5 Democratic majority in their congressional delegation to a 9-1. Now, the good news is their state Supreme Court shut it down. They said, hey, no, you can't do that. You're violating state constitution there. You cannot do that. And what I'm understanding now is their legislature is going to attempt to pass a law that says, okay, we're going to lower the age of our Supreme Court justices in the state of Virginia to from 73 to 53 or 54 and make it retroactive. So they get to appoint all these new people. I don't think that will stand. Hopefully it won't even pass. But now here in Tennessee, if you've been paying any attention, we've had some drama with our redistricting. Now, I'll have to say a couple things that I've heard, and we'll probably talk with Monty about this some later, but I'm just going to hit on a few things. I understand the purpose of the redistricting. I'm all for getting rid of any racial districting. I mean, that just should not exist. I don't necessarily like the way this one turned out in terms of it's going to get rid of Cohen and Cohen's district, but I don't like my county, Stewart County, and here even in Henry County. Now, as part of our district, we're districted with part of Shelby County. That's insane. I've looked at the district, and I'm just like, who came up with this? I think they could have done a better job of districting. Make it more uniform, more, link counties with like interest. And think about it. Wait a minute, Stewart County from Shelby County, that's a long, long way. And we have totally different interests and beliefs. I'm glad that we're getting rid of a Democrat district, or hopefully getting rid of a Democrat district. But I don't like the way this thing is shaped. I thought it could have been done differently. And like I say, I agree with addressing the what the Democrats, what had been created in the past as a racial district. I'm glad to get rid of that. I just don't like the way this thing is set up. And hey, gerrymandering is nothing new, guys. Both sides have done it, but it's not just that. I mean, gerrymandering comes from the Jerry from gerrymandering refers to Eldridge Gerry, who was one of the founding fathers, I think from Massachusetts. And in some election, late 1700s, early 1800s, a district was created to help him stay in power. And they called it they said the district was gerrymandered. So his last name was Jerry, and it looked like a salamander. So that's the origin of the term gerrymandering. But it's always been used, but it should never have been used for racial reasons, one way or the other. So that's the good part. Now, I do like the fact that currently, with this new one, and that may or may not take effect, and we'll probably talk about that some more. My rep before was Matt Van Epps. Not a huge fan. Not overall impressed. My current one, based on this one, if this one holds, I got Andy Ogles. Now, as far as the standards go in the state of Tennessee, when you start talking good reps, good senators, first off, I don't think we have any really good senators. Haggerty's better than Blackburn, but that's an incredibly low bar. Same thing with the House. I mean, the only two we have that are decent are Burchett and Ogles. And I think Ogles is the best of the bunch. So I'm glad to get Andy Ogles. But, there's no guarantee that just because these districts were changed that we will necessarily, keep the people that are in charge. I don't know if Andy Ogles can get reelected in this new district. Maybe he can, maybe he can't. I don't know if Van Epps can get elected in the district that he's now in. You got a bunch of different counties at it. So I don't know. And it may not work out the way we intend or that we want it to work out. Well, that remains to be seen. But also, as I understand it, in order for these to take effect for 2026, the Secretary of State has to be able to do everything needed to have the new names, the new districts, everything done by the 20th. That's not a lot of time. And if it's not ready by the 20th, then as I understand it, for the 2026 election, we'll revert back to the original districts. And then in 2028, these new districts will take effect. I really think it's probably better that they take effect. I didn't like the last minute. I understood the intent. I'll tell you what else I didn't like. Is, as I understand it, this redistrict, because this started off, a lot of people started jumping through hoops to do this right after the Supreme Court opinion. Number one, just because the Supreme Court gives an opinion, I don't think states should jump through hoops on anything. Having said that, if they felt like they had to jump through hoops, then why did we ever have the Hughes versus Lee deal on our Second Amendment? I mean, that Bruin opinion was 2022. But set that aside for a minute. They have selective, I guess you could say, selective adherence to the court. If it's something they want to do, we got to do it now, the court said. If they don't want to do it, they can drag their butt. So they've proven that. They proved we don't have to do what the Supreme Court says. Because, what can the court do? The court doesn't have the money. It doesn't control the money. The court doesn't control the sword. So I don't think this is something we should have jumped through and done. I think we probably could have done a better job taking our time. Maybe, maybe not. In any event, what really irritated me was I was told by a legislator that after this was done, that there were two different, there was a Senate version and a House version. And they submitted them both up to Trump and let him choose whichever one. I'm like, what? We shouldn't be sending our proposed districts, redistricted, we shouldn't be sending that to any president. If that's true, and I believe it is based on the source, that's a state decision. That's not send it to the president and see which one he wants. That's insane. I mean, two different types of TDS. The type of TDS that anything and everything Trump does is wrong and they hate him. And then the type of TDS of, we just got to kiss his butt and do whatever he wants. And if he says this, then, we need to accommodate. No, we're a sovereign state. That was a state decision. And he should not have figured into it in any way, shape, or form. So that's my thought on that. Anyway, we will see if they make that deadline or if we end up implementing these districts in 2028 instead of 2026. If you've seen some of the footage of how the Democrats reacted, especially Justin Pearson, I don't know if you saw it. It's out there where he gets in this state trooper's face. I'm like, had that been reversed, he would have gotten slammed. He would have gotten taken out there. That guy is out of control. But, here's the thing about Pearson. He likes to make a show. He likes to campaign off that kind of stuff for the left because the left loves that, But, and I should have got it to the producer in time, but I didn't. I'll maybe introduce it next week. There's videos of Justin Pearson talking from his college days, which he's not all that old. He's well-spoken. He's got a nice haircut. looks professional, sounds professional. And then you've got the activist, Justin Pearson. And I think maybe we'll do those, and maybe we'll do a little compare and contrast on a future show. Activist, that's the key. He's acting. But you know what? The left loves that stuff. Also, there was some footage, and I did not get all the detail on this. Somebody may have seen it. I guess there was a group of Democrats. I don't think they were all elected Democrats, but Democrats that showed up at the Capitol when this was going on, and just verbally assaulting. As far as I know, they didn't physically assault, but verbally assaulting, profanely, very profanely, Deborah Moody. I mean, that there's no reason for that. There's no excuse for that. I mean, the Democrats act like animals. They just act like animals. They act like thugs. It's like we've got like a BLM thug contingent for Democrats in the state of Tennessee. But the press eats it up. And of course, the press will go along with this idea that, hey, this is Jim Crow too, and you're going to deny. No, you're just not going to have a racial district. You're going to have, the state has a right to redistrict. Nothing says we have to give you a district based on race. It just says, all the 14th says we can't discriminate. Excuse me, the Civil Rights Law of 1965, which was, those type of things were allowed by the 14th Amendment. That we just can't discriminate. That you have to be allowed to vote. It doesn't say you have to be allowed to have a black district or a white district or a Hispanic district or any other kind of district. It just means you can't be denied the right to vote. That was the whole intent. But for a long time they've had that. It was precedent. It was bad precedent, and now they've lost it, and they're upset. So we'll see how that turns out as well. Any luck with our guest there, Mr. Producer? Okay. All right. Yeah, I know he's on the road. Hopefully we'll hear from him soon. So we're going to, next week, by the way, our guest will be Chris Holton, who we were trying to have on a couple of weeks ago. And he's going to talk, he's with the Center for Security, and he's going to talk to us. You hear more about it, about the threat of Sharia law in not just in Tennessee, but across the country, and what they're doing, other organizations that they're working with to help the different communities where this is becoming a problem. And if you have it anywhere, if you have a group starting to form, if they form a neighborhood, if they put up a mosque, if they put up a cemetery, they expand out from that. And whatever area they control, you can bet there's going to be some level of Sharia implemented. So he's going to talk about that and talk about what you can legally do. Guys, it's a threat. The Red-Green Alliance is a real thing, and it's a real threat. It's been undermining us for decades now. And so we need to wake up to, it, like almost every other problem in our country. Now, a lot of the problems obviously have a moral and spiritual root, but most every problem you can think of in this country, pick a problem, is the result of a federal program or policy. We have more Islamists in our country now than we did in 9/11. We have more mosques in our country now than we did in 9/11. We have all these universities that have been federally funded over the years that teach socialism, push socialism. We have a lot of young people today who think socialism is cool. And I guess they believe the lie. Well, hey, all the other places where it ended in poverty and death and murder, they just didn't do it right. But, we can make it work. No, you can't. I went to school in the 80s, and even then they still taught us something. We understood the difference between our system and socialism/communism. We understood that. They don't get that now. So a lot of these younger people, especially if they go to any kind of secondary school and any, college, even community colleges, and now it's, of course, starting in much younger than that, they push all of this left-wing stuff, all the left-wing agenda, the socialist agenda, and our kids don't know any better. And, of course, they grow up, and they end up voting for socialist or maybe even running for office as a socialist. And they don't recognize the threat. They don't know the misery that's caused throughout the world ever since it started, going back to the early part of the 20th century. And so but who's allowed that? Why have we allowed all these people in from the parts of the world that are known for socialism, communism, or the Islamist world? Yet we've brought all these people in here. Apparently didn't do much screening. We used to have a sensible immigration policy. We used to look, and we only allowed a certain number, a small number, of people from cultures and belief systems that were not compatible with ours. In some cases, we just banned them outright, but other cases, okay, we'll let a few of you in, but we're not going to allow millions of you in. That's why our country's so divided. Oh, by the way, speaking of division, and back to the courts, every section of the country has always been different. We've never been a one-size-fits-all people. We've never been that. Even at the founding, the people from the north, the people from the south were different, not just on the issue of slavery, because, hey, when we were founded, every colony had slaves. The north got rid of theirs before the south, but guess what? They didn't free them. They sold them down south. But there was differences, not just the slavery issue, but there were a lot of differences. There were differences in the east, west, north, south. And as we've grown over the years, we just have more different. Well, all of this so-called diversity it really has become perversity. We've taken all these people in from all these different parts of the world, and they don't melt. They don't blend. So now you have a balkanized country. And when we look to the court to be the final arbiter of all these questions, how can we be anything but divided? The only way we stay together long-term as the United States, the only way we stay together is if we follow strictly, and this is something we have to start doing, the Constitution. The 10th Amendment has to mean something. And the federal government has to stay in its lane, which means the states have to insist that it stays in its lane. And that's the only way we're going to stay together, because if everything comes down to a Supreme Court opinion, I mean, look how divided we are on any number of topics. In some cases, even within our state, but certainly across the country. People in California are different than people in Tennessee. People in New York are different than people in Tennessee and Georgia. Yeah, we have way too many of them here, but okay, I've got Monty on the line. Let me see what the deal is. Hey, Monty.
Hey, brother, sorry to call you so late. I just finished in Knox County. Hey, I think if it works for you all to do that and move it back to the 20.
Welcome back. Monty will be joining us in just a minute. Hey, the meeting in Knoxville went late, and I understand how that. And here's part of this, okay? And if you have been around Monty, if you've been to these events, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Number one, Monty does not run from questions, okay? He does not follow a script. It's not like, okay, I'm going to be there exactly 45 minutes, and then I'm going to talk for 10 minutes and answer a few questions, and I'm going to avoid this group of people over here, and I'm going to avoid this. And when I'm getting ready to go, I'm just going to tell, hey, guys, I got to go. And no, he doesn't do that. I mean, if you think that you're going to outweight Monty, you're probably going to be disappointed a lot of times. He stays, he talks with the people. And in addition to that, he takes questions. He doesn't have questions screened. And he gives you thorough answers. He doesn't give you soundbite answers. So as a result, Not only do the meetings he's involved with kind of go long, but the after meeting discussion usually lasts a little while. But we should have him up here in just a second. And obviously, we're going to go longer than okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. No. So the producer is going to get him linked up. I'm going to ramble on while he's doing that. But he's very thorough. He gives you, like I say, doesn't give you soundbite answers. He gives you an explanation. And that's how he operates. And, he's very upfront about it. And he doesn't run from questions. You'll see a lot of, first off, Marcia doesn't want to take any questions. Rose will take some questions, but he's not going to take stuff unscripted. And so most of these guys, when they run for office like this, they keep their schedule. It's very tight. They're not going to spend any extra time because, the longer you're there, the more somebody could ask you a question you're not ready for or a question that's controversial. And a lot of people are afraid of that. Monty's been pretty upfront and he says, you're not going to like all my answers, but it's going to be my answer and I'm going to be truthful with you. And you make your decision from there. Hello, Monty. How are you?
Good, Dave. I apologize for being late. I just left the other event. It went much longer than I thought it would, so I apologize.
Hey, no problem. I understand. I was just telling the audience that you don't give standard answers, okay? That you don't run from questions and you don't give soundbite answers. You give an explanation, and so therefore, not only do the meetings that you're at usually last longer, but the questions after the meeting last longer. And nobody has yet been able to out-talk you.
Well, yeah, my wife's going to kill me. We've not eaten anything all day, and so we had intended to be done by 7:30. It didn't work out that way. Lots of good people and lots of questions. You want to try to answer questions for folks. I do think, and again, to your listeners, viewers, my apologies for being late getting on with you all tonight. It was just the previous meeting went late. And you do try to answer the questions for folks. As Dave was saying, I don't want to avoid answers. I'm really sick of politicians who they say what they think you want to hear when you're there. I try not to do that. I have started opening with an apology when I speak to people and say, I know I'm going to offend some of you, something I say tonight. I offer it in love, in compassion, in straightforwardness. And I often do this. And it's, I had one of the other campaigns made fun of me for this. But I tell people I love them at these gatherings. And I preface that to mean I care about you as fellow Tennesseans. And even if you don't vote for me, that's okay. I'm still going to love you. I'm answering a call and making myself available.
Absolutely. So how do you think things are going overall?
I think really well. I apologize for the noise. I'm sitting on Kingston Pike in Knoxville.
Okay.
It is going well. It's quite a thing to take this on. I'm certain we're working much harder than the other candidates. And we speak everywhere we can speak, every podcast, every interview. We go with meetings between 10 people and 150 people. We've had both of those in the last week. And that message of liberty and less government is something people are thirsty for. People understand when I say don't DC my Tennessee, because they look at other candidates who have been partially responsible for having us $40 trillion in debt and for voting for things to cover up perhaps misdeeds of other congressmen by using your money to do it. And they just shake their head and say that's unacceptable to them. And I think there's probably some people who, some of my positions that are just straightforward, probably some people don't like that, but I think most people are saying things like, at least I know what Fritts thinks. Right. And I can live with that.
Yeah. Well, most politicians don't want to be that honest. They want to leave a little wiggle room, plausible deniability, the ability to come back in there and, oh, no, that's not what I meant. You won't have that luxury. You've been pretty straightforward, so that's good. And I think people appreciate, like you say, even if they don't agree with you, they appreciate that they don't have to wonder what you really mean.
Well, I will tell you, I'll stand by. We're going to try to leave more money in every Tennessean's pocket and in the counties, and stop sending so much to Nashville. And that will be a small and gradual thing, but it will restore liberty back into the spender and the citizen and the county by doing so incrementally, every red cent at a time. And I intend to do that. I intend to recalibrate Nashville, Tennessee, to understand that those commissioners and those senior employees who have a great influence on policy, that they don't get to usurp their authority. They work under the authority of Almighty God's word and the Constitution. And I'll make that crystal clear, or I'll fire them. And I think that's important. I think it's important. There's 35,000 people, maybe 45, 50,000, I don't know, that disagree with me on the voucher thing. But most of them that disagree with me haven't read the Constitution. They don't know what point they're arguing. And there will be some folks upset that don't get the voucher money after I'm elected. But we're going to follow the Constitution to the very best I can. And if that offends a few people, I'm okay with that. I'm trying to do it for the betterment of the state. I think our best days could be ahead of us, but we need a recalibration. We need to set a new azimuth back toward Constitution, back toward liberty and less government. And I'm ready to lead that.
And those
last thing I'll say on that, Dave, and because I know I'm late, and I know you probably just got me going at the top of the hour, and that's fine. I can go eat.
You're not getting off that easy.
Yeah, well, get off that because I'm going to go eat.
Okay.
And I will just tell you, I think that we have found ourselves at a place where we're departing from what the founders' ideas are. I just had a gentleman say to me a few minutes ago, well, the founders' Constitution doesn't exist anymore. Well, that's because we've had weak males in office that have failed to hold to what the truths were. That the words of our Constitution are timeless.
Yep.
And they apply today. The words of Washington's farewell address apply today.
Yep.
They're timeless truths.
Yeah.
Our Constitution is one of those timeless truths, and we need to adhere to it.
Yeah. Well, the people in power like to say our Constitution. They like to say they're upholding it. So the Constitution means what we have to make sure that it means what it was intended to mean, not what spin they put on it, because they're still, the guy that says, well, it doesn't exist anymore, but wait a minute. They're still claiming constitutional authority to do all the things they do to us. And the money that they take in, both at the federal and state level, enables them to do that. And that's, I think, a big part of your theme, is it not?
It is, Dave. And just a simple, there are several things. Again, I'll just touch on two: property tax and grocery sales tax. Both are not new ideas. They're not just some wannabe politician saying we need to try this. I have attempted to do that as a state representative. We are 4% on every dollar you spend on groceries is going to Nashville. We need to stop that. Whether we stop at 2 cents at a time or a penny at a time or all of it at once, I prefer to take that incrementally, and that's what I've tried to do as a state rep. But that leaves the money in your pocket, and then you accelerate that dollar through the economy rather than government. And it also means that the authorities and the power that Nashville and D.C. have over us is equipped by our own dollars. Right. And every opportunity we have to pull a few of those pennies back takes a little power away from central government and puts it back in our pockets and in our counties. We must do that. I'm committed to do that. And then property tax, same kind of thing. Property taxes need to be reformed in Tennessee. Absolutely. We are taxing against unrealized capital gains. The assessments continue to go up. They're going to continue to go up, I think, if people continue to move here and there's a demand for our property, our real estate. I think we've got to take our property taxes to you're taxed against what you paid for the property, not what someone appraises it to be worth. That's the unrealized capital gain. And secondly, we should never have a Tennessean kicked out of their house, their home, their residence because they have fallen behind on property taxes. If I am behind on my taxes and the county puts a lien on it, and when I sell it or when I pass away, that lien has to be paid, that's one thing. But to kick a Tennessean out of their home is unacceptable. And I intend with everything in me to fight to make those two changes.
I agree. Talk about the redistricting vote and why you voted the way you did, if you could.
I'll do that. So first and foremost, I was not crazy about the fact that we had DC politicians who have failed to execute on what they promised, calling down and saying jump, and Governor Lee saying how high. I don't like that. I've said that before. I'll say it again. But if I can prevent a cross-dressing abortionist Democrat from holding a seat in Congress coming from my state of Tennessee, I'm going to try to do that. And I think the redistricting map might help some with that. So I voted for the map. I voted to fund the map. I don't blue light, as you know, many. I don't present not vote many things. I did that on the other bill because right now my qualifications to run for a state representative are Article 2, Section 9 of the Tennessee Constitution, and I have to live in the county I'm going to represent for at least a year before I can run. For our congressman, that is directly referenced. It is not written in the Constitution that way, but the law directly references that part of the Constitution. And we did make an exemption for just this election cycle that didn't apply, that you didn't have to meet that 1-year residency requirement. That's a little problematic for me, so I didn't vote in support of that. The other parts of that bill, about grandfathering the people in that are running, okay, fine. Having a window where new people can run, okay, fine. I just wasn't crazy about the residency requirement, and I was present not voting on that.
Yeah. I'm not wild about how the district turned out. I don't like my county being aligned with part of Shelby County, which is way, way out. But anyway, it is what it is. We'll see how that turns out, and if they meet the timeline, because as I talked about earlier, if they don't meet the timeline, I think of May 20th, then these are not going to take effect until 2028. Was my understanding from what I heard earlier today on the radio. So
yeah, it's a topic of much discussion, and I will tell you, I have the people I vehemently disagree with on the way they vote. I still love them as human beings, right? They can be wrong, and I still have compassion for the people. Not everybody, but some of those people, the way they behaved, it was shameful after the vote, and I think they lost any credence in some of their actions by the way they behaved.
Yeah.
I understand it's a passionate thing, but I also understand we should be able to argue a point without losing all sense of decorum. And I don't know who is the puppet master for this nationwide, but that type behavior is the noisemakers and the screaming and the horns and all those kinds of things. Those are not healthy for the republic.
Yeah, I agree. The younger generation, the people in their 20s and 30s just starting out, I think they have a pretty hard time right now with the situation. It's hard for everybody, but I think maybe in some ways it's harder for them than a lot of others. And all the candidates are 60 plus. What do you think? What kind of response have you been getting from that younger group, and what do you think you understand about them that maybe the others don't?
Well, I think first I'm willing to say that we have an affordability crisis and the others aren't. There's this phobia that if we say that we have an affordability crisis, if we recognize that, especially in housing, but I think housing, ownership and rental, but it goes to car loans and everything. The gas prices aren't helping that at the moment, right?
Yeah.
But if you say that, it's taken that, they'll think we Republicans aren't doing a good job. Well, if you don't admit the truth, people are going to think you're detached. And so I think that's the first point. I think my views on not only illegals, deport every single one. I don't care what they do. I don't care when they got here. They need to be deported. I'll apply every resource I have as the governor of the state of Tennessee to make sure that happens and push ICE to get them out faster.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Treat them human beings, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't mistreat anybody, but again, they need to go.
Absolutely. Data centers.
Legal immigration. We we need to suspend legal immigration. I've said this, and it makes people's heads spin. We need to stop the H-1B visas. I think we just saw with the report on Oracle and our taxpayer-funded support of Oracle and how that didn't work out so well.
Yep.
We do not need to replace American workers with foreign workers.
Nope.
I'm hearing Americans won't do the work. I get it that we have some lazy people, but I'm telling you, if we keep throwing Band-Aids on it, we're gonna perpetuate that. We need to change that. In 1970, 4.5% of our population was foreign born. Today, that's over 15%. We better correct that.
What do you think about data centers? Where do you stand on those?
Not a fan of the data centers for all kinds of reasons. Artificial intelligence, let's go ahead and look at it from just that perspective first. I think God gave you and I the ability to solve very complex problems if we will apply ourselves. And I don't have any problem with supercomputing, but I do have a problem with self-learning replace the intellect of people. That's no good to start with. I think the tracking of our data and to use our resources and to increase the cost of electricity because the demand for that kilowatt is going to increase is unacceptable. I think that they should be required to bring their own energy source with them. And we should make sure that we're not being deleterious to our resources and the environment, whether it's water or air quality or sound quality, by bringing these companies in. And I know everybody wants to jump on we want data centers, right? I'm just not sure that's healthy for us in Tennessee. And I think that there are a group of globalists, most very wealthy, but a group of globalists that see us as just
resources,
an entity that they can overtake for resources. And I'm opposed to that.
Yeah. Got two questions for you, then I'll take whatever closing thoughts you have.
Right.
If you were elected, what are some areas that you would like to see our state retake control of from the federal government?
Well, we've been hoping for the education thing. That's definitely a part of it. I'm all with what the president offered about closing the federal Department of Education. My next thing would be stop taking those dollars. So let's proportionately take those out of what we're collecting with the IRS and stop sending them. I think that's tremendously important. I think that parks, I would like to see more control of our real estate by Tennessee resources rather than federal. And both can become problematic. But we have neighbors that live in places like Polk County and Morgan County that either the state government or the federal government owns a large share of the property. And what they pay in results in the Polk Countyans and the Morgan Countyans paying more property tax. And I think that we need to look at that. Don't mishear that. I'm not talking about shutting down parks and foresting all of our national park spaces. I'm just saying that I think we need to relook how we're doing that. I just met with some folks in Polk County recently, and they're hurting in taxes and infrastructure because a good portion of their county is federal property.
Yep. Yeah, we have that issue in Stewart County as well with the land between the lakes and whatnot. What would you say to those that say you can't win because you don't have millions of dollars to spend on the campaign?
Yeah, I'd say to those people, they need to stop being puppeted by the multi-million-dollar meaningless message people. Those people are counting on everybody just saying, well, I've got to vote for one of these folks because they've got the most money and they've got the most celebrity. Listen to the message. Tell your friends about the message. Pray about this and then vote. If you think Tennessee's going the right direction right now, then you'll have some status quo choices. They won't be me. If you think we need to recalibrate Tennessee, I'm your only choice. I think I'm the only Republican running. I think when you look at my scores, my John Birch Society scores, and that's the common thing that the three of us Republicans are scored against on our voting record, is the John Birch Society and the Freedom Index. It's not even close. If you want somebody who's a constitutionalist, I'm your only choice.
Any closing thoughts?
I appreciate you. I'm starving to death. sitting at Cheddar's on Kingston Pike. I'm going to rent, and my dinner should be there. Thank you for your patience. To your listeners and viewers, my apologies for being late. I would appreciate your vote. I'm going to love you if you don't vote for me. And I would ask you to pray for me that I would do what's right and holy in God's eyes, that I would remember my oath to the Constitution, and I'd keep a servant's heart.
Okay. And hey, I'm going to let you go. I will call you later. I got to talk to you about some things real quick, but you have a good night, and we'll talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, find out more about Monty, go to fritzfortn.com. Now, we've got a couple of upcoming events, and I think the dates, I'm pretty sure the dates are going to change on these, so I will put that out. But right now, we currently have an event for Friday the 15th from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Bowen Combative Arts Academy at 1010 Progress Drive in Clarksville, and then at 6:30 p.m. at Mamma Mia's in Dover on 109 Visitor Center Lane off Highway 79. Those dates are probably both going to change, and I will have more information on that tomorrow. So just, be aware we're still going to have events in both of those places, but the date will likely change to the 28th. But we'll get that verified and finalized in a little later and get that out to you. Hey, thank you for being with us, and we want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. We're close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. We need about another 30 thereabouts. Please help us out. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and also share us with your friends. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter or website, tinaformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And some announcements. These are just the Monty Fritts announcements. I'll skip that because I've already covered that. But the show for next week, our guest will be Chris Holton. We were going to have him on a couple weeks ago, and we had some bad weather. He's with the Security Policy Center. Our topic will be the expansion and threat posed by Sharia law in America and what can be done about it. Please take the time to check out the other shows brought to you by West Tennessee TV by going to westtennesseetv.com or myparistv.com. You can find links to the Mike Weatherford Show and Sportscast with Jeremy Buckaloo. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., Mike welcomes in a guest that we actually had on here, the Tennessee Informer, a while back. Mike Elam will be talking about his work and his book titled Buford Buster, The Other Story. Then on Sunday, June 7th, Sportscast with Jeremy Buckaloo returns. Jeremy welcomes 3 great guest photographers sharing their history in sports photography. Keep checking back to My Terrace TV for new programming regularly. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.